What happens when something you've built your identity around, a job, a marriage, collapses? Welcome to the Self Authority Podcast. I'm your host, Elaine Belson, the Self Authority Coach. Today, I'm joined by coach and podcast host, Leann Herron. Leann shares a story of rebuilding her life after the end of a 20-year marriage, a career transition, financial hardship, and an empty nest all at the same time. We talk about people pleasing, betrayal, trauma, losing yourself, and the journey of learning to trust your instincts, use your voice, and create a life that aligns with who you really are. Here's my conversation with Leann Herron.
Done. Oh, 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 oh.
Welcome, Leann, to the Self Authority Podcast. It's great to have you. So, you have a story for us that you wanted to share?
Absolutely. When I first started thinking about being on your podcast and what your focus is, I knew that my story, which is what spawned my coaching practice and my podcast, is the best story I can share. So if you had told me a decade ago that I would be starting over my life at 45 from the ground up, I'm not sure I would have believed you or anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But life has a way of like stripping away everything that no longer fits, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, so that you can finally come home to yourself. And for me, it was all at once.
Wow.
At that time, I went through a divorce from a 20-year marriage. I left my career and started over. My kids were grown. And so everything happened at one time.
Wow.
And I found myself standing in the wreckage of what I thought my life was supposed to be. So, like I said, a 20-year marriage ending in divorce, a career that no longer aligned with who I was becoming, uh, a bankruptcy that forced me to confront every story I had ever carried about failure and security and worth, a
Wow.
home that grew quiet as my children stepped boldly into their own futures. And so there I was alone for the first time in my life. I was exhausted. I was unsure about starting over in this wide open unknown. And it was kind of a reckoning and a rebirth for me.
Yeah. Right. So, what were you thinking at that point you were going to do?
Just face it, look at where I was. Because at that point, I think my biggest issues was I felt like I didn't know my own identity.
Mhm.
My identity was tied up in being a mom, a career woman, a wife. And all of a sudden, here I was standing in my brand new apartment. I had never lived alone. I went
I remember
from
you telling me
living at
that.
home with my parents to married to divorced to married. And so all of a sudden, here I am in this empty apartment. And I didn't even know how to decorate it because I didn't know who I was because everything I
Mhm.
had owned over the last 45 years involved my children, involved my partner. And so it was really just looking at it from a point of this is the first time I get to focus on me and what do I like.
Mhm.
And so it was scary, but it was also really exciting
Mm.
because like at that point, even though I had went through a bankruptcy, I still had, my income that was coming in and I didn't have any bills anymore. So all of a sudden I was like, wow, I have more money that I know what to do with because I was so used to every penny I brought home going to try to save my house, save my marriage, support my children. And so now I got to just really focus on myself.
Wow. I'm sure there are women out there who can relate to this. So, do you have any thoughts about how that happened? Anything about your background, the way that you were raised, or what kinds of thinking patterns that landed you in that spot where you had lost yourself?
It was a combination of everything I think that transpired throughout my lifetime. I had a lot of abandonment issues growing up, which started basically from birth. I was adopted at 3 months old. And so, what I'm learning as I'm healing is how much of who we are now is who we've been throughout our life through different traumas.
Mhm. I like
And
that.
so, it's hard to know if during those 3 months I was in an orphanage, was I cared for? Was I held? Was I taken care of in a way that an infant should be? Or was I in a room with other babies that weren't receiving the care they needed? And then I grew up in a house where there wasn't a lot of trust. There was also more abandonment. My parents got divorced when I was young.
Mhm.
And so I struggled with security being one of my major issues. I also struggled with betrayal trauma, which I used to think like all my trauma was abandonment because that was like the word or the overarching thing that I could give to it.
Absolutely. And we know that that is an innate fear, abandonment, because children, unlike other species, humans are reliant on their caregivers for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a lot of like fear of rejection, which threw me into people pleasing, over functioning, over giving, over performing, just to feel like if I do all of these things, I'll be wanted, I'll be, all those things.
Yeah. You mentioned betrayal and I interrupted you. What were you going to say about that?
That was a later term realization for me. And I found it, I don't know, things just kind of seem to come up in your feeds and you're watching on TV, different places, but the term betrayal trauma kept coming up over and over for me. And so I started looking into it and I was like, that just seemed to fit more of my life than just the abandonment part. So I had experienced betrayal trauma through infidelity in my marriage. And that was a devastatingly emotional impact and broken trust. I don't think I ever got that trust back with
Mhm.
him. I also witnessed my parents' betrayal in their marriage. Like I said, they divorced when I was like in middle school, but both of my parents cheated on each other.
Mm.
And so as a small child, I'd come home from school and I would witness them going through each other's personal possessions. My dad would be going through my mom's purses and pockets and my mom would do the same thing to him and to me it was like it never made any sense. I was more of this reality driven like, well, you're both doing it. Why is there this need to prove something?
Mhm.
But I think that probably went towards the divorce itself, the legal side. If I can prove he was cheating, then I'll get custody of the kids or I'll get child support or whatever weirdness that they had. But I went through so much betrayal trauma. And then when my son was born, by that point, I had moved out of my mother's house. My brother had moved out from my mother's house. My parents were already divorced. So my mother was alone. And I think when I moved out, it really kind of triggered her in a way that she needed to do something so she wasn't alone. And
Mm-hmm.
so she went to the extreme and tried to accuse me and my new husband of abusing my daughter so that she would end up with custody of my daughter.
Oh, wow. What goodness. Oh my gosh, what an ordeal.
Talk about betrayal. Like
Yes.
there's no other word to describe what I experienced. Like I had just had my mother in the delivery room when my son was born 2 months earlier. But what I found out over time was that she was coaching my daughter through my pregnancy and telling her things like, oh, well, once the baby comes, they'll no longer love you. They won't have time for you. So you should just live with me. And I didn't know any of this was even going on. And so then all of a sudden, I met with Child Protective Services who took my daughter away from me. And we had to go through a 10-month legal battle to get my daughter back and prove that none of this stuff was happening. And so I just went from one betrayal into another betrayal into another betrayal. And then even on top of that, I had workplace betrayal
Mm-hmm.
where, you spend all your time in a job and you get really, really close to your coworkers, to your bosses. At least I did. I always have. And you think your bosses are going to have your back. And all of a sudden I was experiencing trauma that was from that original trauma with my mother that was triggered by a legal case that I was working on. And I went to my boss and said, this is really triggering for me. Like I literally felt like I was sitting there the day child services called me, you know,
Yep.
experiencing the loss of my daughter. I felt like I was the mother that was in this case that I was working on. And so I asked for an accommodation so that I didn't have to work on this case because it was causing me, I wasn't able to sleep at night. I was getting sick going to work. I was having really bad brain fog and memory loss and anxiety and panic. And
Well, good
I
for
didn't,
you for doing that because that's a really good example of self-authority and yeah, asserting your needs. So what happened?
he didn't have my back.
Yeah.
Absolutely did not. He would say things like, "Oh, well, it's just emotion or it's just a hearing. Why is this bothering you? This isn't happening to you. This is just a case." And I couldn't, my brain fog and memory loss was so extreme that I couldn't verbalize
Mhm.
what I
Yep.
was physically experiencing, but I knew what the trauma was. I knew what the trauma was. I knew what the triggers were, but
Mm,
I couldn't explain it in a way to make him understand. And
right.
so his response, like I said, was just very cold,
Mm.
uncompassionate, no empathy. And his grand fix for the whole thing was I came into work one morning and there was a bottle of melatonin gummies sitting on my desk.
Oh,
And he
wow.
says, well, these will help you sleep.
Wow. Wow. That's not
And
only
so
sensitive, it's inappropriate, but wow. So, it really brings home how little understanding there is about mental health. I don't know that we would see anything better today, but I think it's really important for women to hear that even though you didn't get the response that you wanted, that it was still the right thing to do, and that you had a right to be you were human, you were being human in that moment, and that's what we all are, right? And to be able to forgive ourselves for being what we are, you had good reasons for being in the place that you were at that time, right? You had not had a chance to process any of that trauma at that point. So, and that's, again, that's just part of being human. We have to forgive ourselves for where we are, and there's good reasons for it. If you could go back, is there any other advice that you would give yourself back then?
Um, One thing that's very clear to me after the fact was for probably 9 months, I guilted myself into staying in that job. And a lot of that went back to, filing bankruptcy and starting over. And this was the most money I had ever made in my career.
Mhm.
I went to college to change from being an accountant to working in the legal field. And this is what I wanted to do. This is what I was passionate about. And so I guilted myself into staying no matter how bad it was affecting me.
Mhm.
And so the first time I guilted myself with all those things like, oh, this is the most money and you went to school for this and just write it out. Eventually this case will go away and you'll be fine. And so I quit and guilted myself to go back. And
Uh,
then the second time, as it progressively got worse, my trauma got worse. I quit again and my boss guilted me to come back.
mhm.
And the third time, it was so extreme that they literally found me kind of curled up in a ball on the floor in my office. And I was having such an extreme panic attack that
Mm.
I felt like all of the binders that were up on top of my file cabinets were just coming down on top of me.
Mhm.
And at that point, I turned in my keys, I turned in my badges. I didn't even say goodbye. I just left and said, I can't keep doing this to myself. So I think if it's a piece of advice for somebody else that's facing something like this, or even just facing a toxic work environment or facing a bad marital situation, whatever the case may be, is trust your gut.
Yep.
Trust your instincts. Don't force yourself to stay in a toxic situation because you are not doing yourself any good.
Right. And, you know, one of the things that I find is that women know this. Like you said, there's that gut feeling. They just don't listen to it. But there are feelings and there's wants and needs that aren't being met that are telling them that the situation is not good. And yet they will second guess themselves. Is there something more I should be doing? Or is there something that I'm not doing? One of the things that I encourage women to do that I think is helpful is to turn it around and ask themselves, if the situation were reversed, would you treat somebody the way you're being treated?
Yeah, and that's a great piece of advice or something for us to sit with and think about because no, absolutely not. I wouldn't treat anyone that way, not an employee, not a subordinate, not a friend, not a
Mhm.
family member.
Right, right. So you found yourself without a job, and where did you go from there with all of that?
When it started, when I finally left my job and I was really, really blessed with the financial ability to take a year off and just focus on my mental health and my physical health. And
Good.
so I started with what I thought was the first path to take. I went to my primary care physician and did the best that I could verbalizing the symptoms that I was experiencing. And what I was met with was, here, let me write you a prescription for an antidepressant. And
Mm,
that was it. And so I left there just very, very lost. Like I came to you for, and actually the main reason I went to my primary care physician was for a referral to a therapist because I kept thinking, this is what I need. I need to talk to somebody. I need to start working on all of my trauma because I have never worked on it. I spent an entire life, the first 45 years of my life, shoving it down, pushing it down, ignoring it, denying it, and
Yep.
thinking that was resilience. Like,
Uh-huh.
brilliant. I can be kicked in the teeth and I can still get up and get
Right.
dressed and go to work and put on my
Right.
face and
Right. But
function.
resilience doesn't mean you're not affected by it, right? Resilience means that you can overcome it, but you don't ignore it. And just because you're affected by it doesn't mean that you aren't resilient. So I have a lot of clients will come to me and they'll say, I've been keeping this bottled up for so long, right? Without any problems, quote unquote, it's not coming out. Why now? And I'll always say, because you can only keep it down for so long. Eventually it's going to come up. Right.
Absolutely. But I had no concept of that. Like
Sure.
I didn't understand my nervous system. I didn't understand that I had been living in fight, flight, freeze my entire life and that there was a limit. Nobody talked to me about, even being like, imagining yourself as a kettle sitting on a hot stove and that water boiling. And eventually
Yep.
it's going to pop. The steam's got to escape. And nobody ever told me about that. Nobody ever told me that I should be taking care of myself so that I could be my best self, so that I could still continue to show up, but show up from a better place, from a place that was whole and happy and healthy.
Right.
I was just told to be a people pleaser and take care of everybody else and put everybody else's needs first. And nobody ever talked to me about all of this other stuff. So it took me going through this, it took Pandora's box to open and all of those things to come out for me to have to sit down and face them and not. But I do honestly, I remember when I met my therapist for the first time, I actually told her, all I need for you to do is for you to tell me how to close Pandora's box so that I can go back to being who I am. And she was just the sweetest lady and put her hand on my shoulder and she just goes, honey, it doesn't work like that. Like, we need to work through this. We need to unpack this stuff. And I'm here to sit with you while we do that.
Mhm.
But I just had no concept of it.
Right.
And so I started with therapy. Didn't really connect with it over time. I just didn't like that unpacking and unpacking and unpacking. Every time I went, it was like I was repeating the same story, but I wasn't learning any tools.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so I was introduced my first line into other modalities, other healing modalities,
Mhm.
was I was introduced to an herbalist who started working with me through herbs and teas and tinctures to calm my nervous system. Like I said, I
Right.
had no concept that my nervous system was on fire, that it had hit max capacity, and that I was at full overwhelm.
Right.
So she started there.
Yeah. You know, therapy has evolved a lot too over the years, I can say, as someone who's been a therapist for over 30 years. And the whole focus on the nervous system and what we call somatic therapy is fairly new. And so you're right. I think you ran into a problem where there wasn't as much awareness back then as there is now about the connection between trauma and our nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe that as well. I mean, I adored my therapist. She was the nicest lady. but I didn't feel better when I left. I felt
Yeah.
worse when I
That's
left. And I had no
yeah.
tools to
Yeah.
take with me
Right.
to when I got home to be able to work through these things.
Right. To self-regulate.
So,
Mm,
yeah. So I started with, like I said, working with an herbalist. I taught myself how to meditate. I had never meditated a day in my life.
mhm.
So I taught myself how to meditate and have a daily meditation practice and grew that into so many different things, learning about my breath and how I could control my breath and learning how to have gratitude for my body that could hold me in a place where I could take these journeys in my mind, where I could do visualizations. I just started learning more and more about what I was putting into my body, both through nutrition, through the foods I was eating, making sure I was getting enough water, making sure I was getting quality sleep, and how all of those things affected my nervous system,
Mhm.
my brain fog, my memory loss. And all of those things just started improving because I was learning about my body.
Right.
So I do a lot of energy work.
Okay.
I work with balancing chakras. I work with sound healing. So using sound bowls and frequency, but it's all
Mhm.
energy. We
Yeah.
are all energy. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's just my energetic field.
Mhm. So, I don't know if we'll get back to this, so I'm gonna ask you this now. Someone listening, if they wanted to pursue more of this, if this were intriguing to them, this is something that you do now as a coach?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So
Yeah. One thing I do as a coach, and it depends on the individual. Some people will come to me and they'll just feel like they're out of balance. One thing that was always clear for me growing up was my throat chakra has always been out of balance. And where I knew that was reality was that I never had a voice.
mhm.
I was raised to be seen and not heard.
Right.
And when I did try to use my voice with my boss, I was met with that it wasn't important. My needs weren't important. And so again, I stopped using my voice. And that's where it always shows up
Mhm.
in a blockage
Yeah.
that something isn't right because I'm not utilizing my voice. And then I've learned other tools to bring that in balance. So I can use a singing bowl. I can use tuning forks to rebalance that energy. And I've also learned through somatic work, through breath work,
Mhm.
how to move that trapped energy in my body. So I never knew things like, oh, your body holds on to trauma.
Yep.
So I learned how to do like a body inventory.
Mhm.
So where am I feeling tension? Where am I tight? Where am I holding my stress? And learning how to utilize all of these different tools that I've developed to release that trapped energy in my body. So that it's kind of a combination of all of my tools that I pull together in my coaching practice. It's not just mindset work because I want people to understand that it's not just our mind, our body, and our spirit. And this is the way that we can balance those three things.
Right. Right. And, I'm always saying to people that you're way more complicated than you give yourself credit for. And there probably isn't one solution. So, someone can come to me for help with their mindset, but that doesn't that isn't the entire picture. So you discovered all of this. And so how did that translate back into your life and in a practical way? How did it change your life?
From where I started when I was going through all of these different modalities was seeing the shift in me, the understanding, the ability to sit with these traumas that I experienced over a lifetime and not fear them, not continue to ignore them or push them down, but to actually befriend them, invite them in, and learn how to sit with those uncomfortable feelings.
Absolutely.
And, what did they relate to? Did they relate to a belief that was maybe handed down to me from generation to generation? Are these true for me? Are these true how I truly feel in my values, in my morals? Or is this something that was pushed on me?
Mhm.
And so, learning these different modalities and doing the work on myself helped me really understand that there was so much I didn't know about.
Right.
And so after a year, when it was now time for me to start figuring out what I was going to do with my life, was I going to return to the legal field? Was I going to find something else? That's where I found coaching. That's what came up for me was this ability to help others through what I had experienced and learned. And how could I best do that? And so I got certified as a health and holistic or life and holistic health coach. And I also created the podcast because I wanted to be able to provide referral sources
Mhm.
and education and information about all the different things that helped me outside of just coaching so that people know what's available in this great, big, beautiful world that we live in. And if it's not something I do, I can refer them to somebody that's their specialty. So that's kind of how it's flowed into my life now. I know how to set boundaries. I know how to use my voice. I have this wonderful giant toolbox of these different modalities. I don't claim to be healed. I had 45 years of trauma. You're not healed in 5. Things are still going to come up that may be way under the surface that I haven't even gotten to yet. But I have tools that I can look at and say, okay, well, what do I need in this situation? I've learned how to ask myself the important questions like when I was experiencing anxiety,
Mhm.
was understanding that anxiety is a messenger. It's trying to get your attention. It's your body trying to keep you safe.
That's right.
Is this something that's happening to me right now? I used to have a lot of triggers around my ex-husband. And so, is he knocking on my door? Is he trying to get at me? Or is this just my brain trying to keep me safe? And so I learned how to ask those questions and sit with the anxiety.
Yeah.
I learned how to tell like how long that peak was and that it comes down.
Absolutely.
And I learned how to control my thoughts. So it wasn't feeding it by ruminating.
Exactly. Exactly. That's yeah, all of that is just so valuable. So you mentioned that you realized that your values were different from the values that you had been brought up to believe. And I think that that is just such a great example of what I call embracing your humanity, which is that I believe that we have, like you talked about instincts, we have those values inside of us and as well as wants and needs, and that they can guide us if we listen to them, right? As well as our ability to reason. All of that is that's the good news is that everyone listening, you already have these abilities within you. It's just a matter of discovering them, right? And harnessing them.
I think because we have been taught for so long not to listen to those things.
Mhm.
So we don't really know how to do that.
Right. Yeah. I think especially women, we've been discouraged from trusting feelings as something that is legitimate, right? Yeah. So if someone out there is listening and finds themselves at a crossroads in their life, what advice would you have for them? Where would you tell them to start?
I think it really depends on the situation, whatever that crossroads is. Is it changing careers? Is it ending a marriage? Is it, there's so many different avenues that my clients come to me for. I've had clients come to me for career work. They're looking at changing jobs or maybe they want to move to another state. I've had younger clients who never learned how to keep a checkbook or uh, create a savings account. So I think it just depends on the individual, but I like to meet them where they're.
Right.
So that's kind of usually where I like to start with an assessment of where you're at. I don't want to necessarily unpack traumas, but I want to acknowledge that they exist, that they're real, and just meet people where they're at and then look at where they want to go. Because
Right.
coaching is, it's forward facing.
Yeah.
So when somebody comes to me for coaching, it's because they're ready to move to that next phase of life. So we look at where you are and where you want to go. And I help you see what's possible for yourself.
Mhm.
And even in situations where it may be ending a toxic relationship, when you have lived in that state of fear or self doubt and you don't believe you can do it on your own or that's even possible because you have felt like you have to stay and that's where
Right.
you're stuck, is helping them see what's available to them, whatever that may be, whether it's resources that are available or believing in themselves.
Yep. Yep. That they can do it. Yeah, that's what I was groping for there is that no matter what the transformation that you're thinking about, or no matter what that crossroads is, trusting it that it's trying to tell you something rather than second guessing or thinking that there's something wrong with you or that you're being unreasonable or talking yourself out of it for practical reasons. I mean, obviously we need to subsist, right? But that there are other avenues that a lot of times women don't look at. They tell themselves that this is the only option for me. Yeah. And and so what do you tell women in terms of getting that courage to move forward, to go into the unknown because it's so much easier to stay into the known even though it's not making them happy.
One thing that I like to do, and that, when I was going through my certification as a coach, they tell you not to share your story. You're supposed to be the active listener in this, and you're supposed to help people see the path. But what I have found is sharing my story in a way that gives them permission or helps them see what's possible. So for me, one, I went to college in my 30s the first time, where the rest of my friends went to college right after high school. I was raising a baby. That wasn't an option for me. And I did the majority of my college all online because for myself, I'm that kind of a learner. I can't sit in a classroom and listen to somebody lecture. I'm going to fall asleep. That doesn't work for me. So I learned how to be a strong note taker. I learned how to organize my thoughts in ways that made sense to me so that I could access them for testing, for putting things into place. When I decided to go to school to get my certification, I was only a year into my trauma work.
Mm-hmm.
So I was still struggling with brain fog and memory loss. And I had a lot of self doubt. Like, how am I going to remember anatomy again? How am I going to remember all of this information that I was learning? Because I just had this overwhelming fear and doubt because of the brain fog and the memory loss. But what I was able to do was I was able to stand in my own power and remind myself I have done this before.
Mm-hmm.
I did this while I was raising two children, working full time, living 40 miles away from where I was working and having to commute on a train every day. So I was losing an hour on either end commuting.
Right.
And I was still able to go to college online, get my associate's degree and my bachelor's degree while raising kids, while keeping a house, while working full time. If I could do that then, I could sure do it now at 50.
Right.
My kids are grown. I mean, my obligations were so different
Mm-hmm.
that I was like, I believed in myself. I
Yeah.
had to remind myself that even though I felt like I was starting over, I wasn't starting over from zero. I was starting
Exactly.
over from 45 years of knowledge, education, experience,
Right.
and that I could utilize all of that and do it again.
Absolutely. That's great, Leanne. That's really helpful. And I love the fact that you persisted, that you I mean, I know it sounds so cliche, but you believed in your ability to overcome. You don't always have to have the answers. You just have to believe in yourself that you can do it. And a lot of women, I mean, they do. They are so strong and they've put up and done so much that they forget that counts, and it's a testament to their own resilience. So, wow, if there's a takeaway for you, uh, what would that be from all of this whole story?
I would say that one, believing in yourself, that you possess more power, more strength, more clarity than you give yourself credit for. When you're in the thick of it, you don't see it.
Mhm.
And really also just understanding that healing isn't about becoming someone new, but it's about coming home to yourself and
Right.
not to fear the unknown, but to embrace it because there is so much beauty in this world that is available to us, that just believing in yourself, you're halfway there, you're three-quarters of the way there. And that there are people like coaches, like therapists that are there to walk alongside of us, that we're not having to do this alone, and that it's okay to give yourself permission,
Mhm.
that you don't need somebody else's permission from an employer or a parent or a spouse, but give yourself permission to make these changes in your life.
Right. And I really like that about it's not about reinventing yourself, it's really about finding yourself. Because again, that's what self-authority is about. It's about turning inward right? Making decisions based on those instincts that you have, those values, those ability to reason, and yeah, all of that, wants and needs, all of that. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a eye-opening discussion and hearing your story, and I think a lot of women will be inspired by it. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
And thank you so much for the invitation to come and share my story, because that's my greatest hope, is that by me having the courage to share my story will give somebody else permission to do the same.
Absolutely. Right. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Self Authority Podcast. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to like and subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can learn more about Leann Herron, her coaching, and her podcast, Happiness on Tap, in the show notes. And remember, self authority isn't about becoming someone new, it's about coming home to who you truly are. I'm Elaine Belson, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
Well, I'm happy beside my soul. So what's left to say? It's my na na